It's the fall of 1774. We're just over 6 months away from the first shots of the American Revolution, almost 2 years away from the Declaration of Independence, but the ball is getting rolling on the American Revolution at this point in time as the First Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Let's get to it. It's the First Continental Congress. So in September 1774, 55 delegates from 12 of the 13 original colonies, Georgia did not attend, came to Philadelphia to meet at Carpenters Hall for the First Continental Congress. Now, they did not meet at what would soon be called Independence Hall, the Pennsylvania State House. No, they met at Carpenters Hall. This is a very small building. I want to show you guys some pictures I took of Carpenters Hall about 10 years ago, back in the spring, early summer of 2014. So here it is, Carpenters Hall. Not a very big building. Imagine 55 men cramming themselves into this building. It's pretty hot in September still. Of course, no air conditioning. And what you're seeing there, I mean, that's the full span of this building as it looks today. You walk in this front door, it's kind of like a coat room area. Upstairs, you got some small apartments for some people to stay. And then this back area is where they met. And I mean, that's the full width of the building. This is how it looks inside. So, I mean, that's the original building, 55 people crammed in there. You can understand why later, when they had the Second Continental Congress, they chose a much bigger meeting place a couple of blocks away. But for now, they're at Carpenters Hall. Now, the goal of this meeting was to come up with some strategies to get rid of the unjust taxes and laws that had been passed most recently by the British, in response to the Boston Tea Party, in response to other protests that had been happening because of all the different taxes that were coming down the line, the hostilities in Boston, with the Boston Massacre having occurred at this point in time, with the Boston Tea Party having occurred. Check my channel for other videos on all of these factors that led to the American Revolution. But in the end, they felt like they needed to come together. Now, they had met before. They had the Stamp Act Congress, and they came up with a colonial boycott back in the 1760s that got rid of the Stamp Act. So they had some precedent to think that they might be able to band together and get the British to repeal some of these laws. Now, they were not talking independence. Nowhere close to a majority of the people there, hardly any of the people there, wanted independence in the fall of 1774. They didn't see themselves as founding a new country. They saw themselves as Englishmen who just wanted their rights restored. So who were some of the people that were there? Well, here you see Patrick Henry, the fiery speaker from Virginia, who, of course, lit up the room when he said the distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American. So yes, I mean, some people at that point in time, they saw themselves as more like their colonies were their countries. They saw themselves as New Yorkers, all right, or Pennsylvanians or Virginians. But now, they're starting to see themselves as all in this together. 12, soon 13 colonies, all out for the same thing, one unified country. Who are some of the other people there? John Adams, the famous Boston lawyer who got the British soldiers acquitted after the Boston Massacre, who believed in law and order in these colonies under British law. John Jay, the future justice of the First Supreme Court. Samuel Adams, leader, of course, of the Sons of Liberty in Boston and cousin of John Adams. And yes, George Washington, the hero of the French and Indian War. Who wasn't there? Thomas Jefferson. He would be there at the Second Continental Congress. Ben Franklin, he's over in England right now. He'll be there at the Second Continental Congress. Now, Jefferson, though, he did have a presence, interestingly enough. He distributed a piece of writing called A Summary View of the Rights of British America. And this was given out at the First Continental Congress, and they debated it. And what's interesting here is Jefferson was building up a reputation as kind of a radical political writer at this moment in time. And it also shows that this is a man of duplicity, because this is a man who on one hand owns slaves. This is a man who will eventually have children with one of his slaves, while at the same time, he's writing about the evils of slavery. So when you look at that objectively in our moment in time, you think, how could a man who owns slaves, who's profiting off of enslaved people, write about how it's so evil. How do you justify that in your mind? But this is what he did, and this is what he wrote. I'm not going to read all this, but just a little bit. He writes, the abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. But previous to the enfranchisement of the slaves we have, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa, yet our repeated attempts to effect this by prohibitions and by imposing duties which might amount to a prohibition have been hitherto defeated by His Majesty's negative. So he's writing about how they need to ban the slave trade and how essentially the king has been forcing slavery upon his colonies. That's Thomas Jefferson in 1774. He would be at the Second Continental Congress. So what are the results of the First Continental Congress? Well, they come to the idea that they are going to boycott all British goods and trade yet again, just like they had done to, get the Stamp Act repealed back in the mid-1760s. You're going to try that again, see if that works. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. They're going to ask England to repeal all of the laws that they believe have been unjustly passed on the colonists. And they tell the delegates from Boston, people like John and Samuel Adams, tell the people around Boston to arm themselves against the British, to form colonial militias, county militias, and to be ready just in case some fighting were to break out. And oh yes, fighting would break out in just over 6 months' time. So that is the First Continental Congress, a brief summary of the biggest moments and the biggest results of that first meeting in Philadelphia. Hope this video helped you out and that you enjoyed it and you learned a bit about American history. If you did like it, please hit that like button on this channel. Subscribe. I would greatly appreciate your support. We'll see you here next time.